Imagine walking into Albert Einstein's study. On one wall hang three portraits. Three people the greatest scientists of the 20th century admired so deeply that he looked at them every single day. The first was Isaac Newton. The second was James Clerk Maxwell. And the third was a man who never attended university, a man who began his life binding books in a tiny London shop, a man whose name many people today have never even heard. His name was Michael Faraday. Yet without Michael Faraday, the modern world as we know it simply would not exist. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Storyroom. I'm so happy you're here with me today. Take a slow, deep breath. Let your shoulders relax. Clear your mind, and let this story carry you back more than 200 years to the narrow, cold streets of London, where a poor young boy with no wealth, no formal education, and almost no opportunities is about to change the future of humanity. Our story begins in the year 1791, in one of the poorest parts of South London. A baby boy was born into a family that had very little. His father, James Faraday, was a hard-working blacksmith who spent his days shaping glowing iron with a hammer and his bare hands. But he was often too ill to work, which meant the family was constantly struggling to survive. They moved from one tiny rented room to another, always chasing cheaper rent, always wondering where the next meal would come from. There were weeks when young Michael was given just one loaf of bread, and somehow that single loaf had to feed him for 7 long days. For a few years, he attended a simple local school. There he learned to read, to write, and to do basic arithmetic. That was the extent of his education. His parents simply could not afford anything more. By the age of 13, Michael's school days were over. If the family was going to survive, he needed to earn money. He found work as an errand boy for George Ribot, the owner of a small bookshop and bookbinding workshop in London. His daily tasks were ordinary. He delivered newspapers, swept the floors, carried packages across the city, and helped wherever he was needed. Nothing about the job seemed remarkable. But sometimes, the smallest opportunities become the turning points that change history. When Michael turned 14, George Ribot offered him an apprenticeship in bookbinding. For the next 7 years, Michael learned how to transform loose sheets of paper into beautifully bound books. He stitched pages together with needle and thread, pressed them between fine leather covers, and carefully shaped them into volumes that would last for generations. It was slow, patient, and highly skilled work. His hands learned precision. His fingers learned patience. His eyes learned to notice even the smallest imperfections. Day after day, he stood at the workbench, surrounded by the rich smell of leather, glue, fresh paper, and ink. But something extraordinary was happening. Michael Faraday wasn't just making books. He was reading them. Every science book that entered the shop became another lesson. Every article about chemistry, electricity, or the natural world captured his attention. Late at night, by the soft light of a candle in his tiny room above the shop, he taught himself what no classroom ever could. Then one book changed everything. It was Conversations on Chemistry, written by Jane Marcet. Unlike most scientific books of its time, it explained difficult ideas in clear, simple language that ordinary people could understand. Michael couldn't put it down. He read it once, then he read it again, and again. With every page, a new world opened before him. A hidden world filled with invisible forces, tiny atoms, and mysterious energy that seemed almost magical. But Michael wasn't satisfied with simply reading. He wanted proof. He wanted to see these ideas with his own eyes. So he saved every coin he could. He bought bits of wire, small pieces of metal, old glass bottles, and whatever inexpensive materials he could find. In the back of the bookshop, he built simple experiments and tested everything he had learned. Without realizing it, the young bookbinder had turned his workplace into his very first laboratory. Still, books alone could only take him so far. Michael dreamed of seeing real science in action. Then, in 1812, something incredible happened. A customer at the bookshop gave him a ticket to attend a series of lectures at the Royal Institution, one of the most respected scientific organizations in England. Standing on the stage was the country's most celebrated scientist, Sir Humphrey Davy. Davy was more than just famous. He had discovered new chemical elements, invented the miner's safety lamp that saved countless lives, and become one of the brightest stars in British science. Michael sat quietly among the audience, completely captivated. He watched every movement. He listened to every word. He carefully sketched every experiment. While others simply enjoyed the lectures, Michael studied them as though they were the most important lessons of his life. When the final lecture ended, he went home and did something only a bookbinder could have imagined. He gathered more than 300 pages of carefully written notes and detailed drawings. Then he stitched them together, bound them in fine leather, and created a beautiful book. It wasn't just a notebook. It was his dream, bound between two covers. Then he wrote a letter to Sir Humphrey Davy. He explained that he was a poor young man who longed to leave the world of trade and dedicate his life to science. He didn't ask for fame or money. He simply asked for an opportunity and promised he would do any job, no matter how humble. He sent the letter along with the beautifully bound notebook. When Davy opened it, he was astonished. He showed it to a friend and asked, "What should I do with this young man?" His friend smiled and replied, "Let him wash bottles. If he is truly meant for science, he will gladly accept the work. If he refuses, then he was never meant for it." A few months later, in March 1813, that opportunity finally arrived. At just 21 years old, with no university degree, no formal scientific training, and no influential connections, Michael Faraday walked through the doors of the Royal Institution as a laboratory assistant. It wasn't a glamorous position. His job was to wash bottles, clean laboratory equipment, prepare chemicals, light the furnaces, and assist the scientists during their experiments. But to Michael Faraday, it wasn't just a job. It was a first step toward changing the world. Michael's first job was anything but glamorous. He cleaned glass bottles and laboratory equipment, prepared chemicals, lit the furnaces, and assisted the senior scientists with their experiments. He was even given a small room inside the Royal Institution to live in. The pay was lower than what he had earned as a bookbinder, but Michael never complained. Money was no longer what mattered. For the first time in his life, he was exactly where he had always dreamed of being. He was surrounded by science. Every day, he could watch great minds at work, listen to their discussions, and learn from their experiments. To him, that opportunity was worth more than any salary. Not long afterward, Sir Humphrey Davy invited Faraday to accompany him on an extended scientific tour across Europe. Together they traveled through France, Italy, Switzerland, and Belgium, visiting the finest laboratories and meeting some of the greatest scientists of the age. For a young man who had educated himself by reading borrowed books, it felt like stepping into another world. But the journey was not as glorious as it seemed. Davy's wife, Lady Davy, refused to see Faraday as a fellow scientist. Instead, she treated him like a servant. She made him dine with the household staff, carry her luggage, and obey her every command. For a young man who dreamed of earning respect through science, the humiliation cut deeply. Yet Faraday never argued. He never complained. Instead, he watched, listened, learned, and filled notebook after notebook with everything he observed. Every disappointment became another lesson, and every insult strengthened his determination. 18 months later, he returned to London with something far more valuable than pride. He came back with knowledge, experience, and even stronger desire to discover something the world had never seen. Over the next several years, Faraday devoted himself completely to his work. He arrived before everyone else, stayed long after others had gone home, and recorded every experiment with extraordinary care. His patience, discipline, and attention to detail soon earned Davy's trust, and little by little, Faraday was given more responsibility. Before long, he was making discoveries of his own. Then, in 1821, everything changed. Faraday built a simple device using nothing more than a wire, a magnet, a battery, and a bowl of liquid mercury. He connected the battery and waited. To his amazement, the wire began to move. It slowly rotated around the magnet, driven only by the invisible force of electricity. No one touched it. There were no gears, no springs, no hidden mechanism. For the first time in history, electricity had been turned into continuous motion. It was the world's first electric motor. At first glance, it looked almost insignificant, but that tiny spinning wire would eventually power an entire civilization. Every electric fan, every washing machine, every factory, every train, every elevator, and every electric vehicle can trace its origins back to that quiet moment in Faraday's laboratory. A self-taught bookbinder had just taken the first step toward the electric age. The scientific community quickly recognized the importance of his achievement, and Faraday's reputation began to grow. But success also brought an unexpected challenge. Humphrey Davy, the mentor who had opened the door to science for him, slowly became jealous of his brilliant student. Some critics accused Faraday of borrowing ideas from other researchers. The accusations were unfair, yet Davy chose not to defend him. Worse still, when Faraday was nominated for membership in the Royal Society, the highest scientific honor in Britain, Davy cast the only vote against him. The man who had once given Faraday his chance was now trying to hold him back. But truth has a way of revealing itself. The other scientists recognized Faraday's extraordinary talent, and in 1824 he was elected to the Royal Society despite Davy's opposition. Faraday did not waste time arguing or seeking revenge. He simply returned to his laboratory and kept working. That quiet determination led to the greatest discovery of his life. For years, scientists had known that electricity could produce magnetism, but Faraday kept asking a different question. Could magnetism produce electricity? No one had found the answer. Then on August 29, 1831, Faraday walked into his laboratory and set up one of the most famous experiments in scientific history. He wrapped 2 coils of copper wire around an iron ring. One coil was connected to a battery. The other was connected to a sensitive measuring instrument capable of detecting the tiniest electric current. He switched on the battery. The needle moved for only a split second. Then it became still. Faraday paused. He disconnected the battery. The needle jumped again. His heart began to race. In that tiny movement, almost too small to notice, Faraday realized he had uncovered one of nature's greatest secrets. He had discovered electromagnetic induction, the principle that a changing magnetic field can generate electricity. That single discovery transformed the future of humanity. Every power station, every electrical generator, every transformer, and nearly every modern electrical system is built upon the principle Faraday discovered that day. Every time you switch on a light, charge your phone, or plug in a computer, you are using the idea that began in his laboratory nearly 2 centuries ago. What makes this achievement even more astonishing is that Faraday accomplished it without advanced mathematics. He had almost no formal mathematical education. Instead of seeing equations, he imagined invisible lines of force flowing through space like ripples across water. Most scientists relied on numbers. Faraday relied on imagination. Years later, the brilliant Scottish physicist James Clerk Maxwell transformed Faraday's ideas into mathematical equations. Those equations became one of the foundations of modern physics. Maxwell himself admitted that he had simply expressed in mathematics what Faraday had already seen in his mind. Albert Einstein later described Faraday's discoveries as the greatest transformation in physics since Isaac Newton. That is why Faraday's portrait hung on Einstein's wall. Not because he was famous, but because he changed the way humanity understood the universe. Yet, despite worldwide admiration, Michael Faraday remained remarkably humble. When Queen Victoria offered him a knighthood, he politely declined. When the Royal Society twice asked him to become its president, he declined both times. He was even offered the honor of being buried beside Isaac Newton in Westminster Abbey. Again, he refused. He asked only for a simple grave marked by a plain stone. Until the end of his life, Faraday continued living modestly at the Royal Institution, the very place where he had once washed laboratory bottles as an unknown assistant. He also devoted himself to teaching, especially through his famous Christmas lectures for children. Using nothing more than a candle flame, a magnet, a block of ice, and a handful of iron filings, he revealed the beauty of science in ways that ordinary people could understand. To Faraday, science was never meant to belong only to professors or the wealthy. It belonged to everyone. Perhaps that belief came from never forgetting the hungry little boy he once was, the boy standing outside a world he believed he could never enter. In his later years, Faraday's memory slowly began to fade, likely damaged by a decade of exposure to hazardous chemicals. The brilliant mind that had illuminated the world gradually lost its own light. He became forgetful. He struggled to concentrate. Eventually, he could no longer continue the work he loved so deeply. For a man whose life had been devoted to careful observation, it was a heartbreaking ending. Yet those who knew him said he remained as gentle, humble, and grateful as ever. On August 25, 1867, Michael Faraday passed away at the age of 75. He was laid to rest in Highgate Cemetery beneath a simple stone bearing only his name. No grand monument, no statues, no marble angels, just quiet simplicity, exactly as he had wished. No marble angels, no grand monument, just a simple stone, a name, and a quiet legacy of a man who never chased fame, only the truth. And with that, my friends, the story of the humble bookbinder who helped light up the modern world comes to an end. Michael Faraday never attended university. He never earned a degree. He couldn't even write the complex mathematical equations that later explained his own discoveries. Yet he possessed something far more powerful than any diploma. He had an endless curiosity, a quiet, patient, unstoppable curiosity that transformed a tiny bookbinding workshop into a laboratory, turned a single loaf of bread into a week of survival, and changed a notebook filled with careful observations into the key that opened every door to his future. If there is one thing I hope you remember from Faraday's story, it isn't the science, it isn't the experiments, and it isn't even the discoveries. It's the notebook. A poor young man, with no wealth, no prestigious education, and no special advantages, sat down and filled more than 300 pages with careful notes, sketches, and questions. Then he bound those pages into a beautiful book and found the courage to send it to someone he deeply admired. That one decision changed not only his own life, it changed the world. And perhaps that's the most inspiring part of this story. Whether you realize it or not, you are creating your own notebook every single day. Every new word you learn, every story you listen to, every idea you understand, every small step you take, you are adding another page to it. You are building knowledge. You are building confidence. You are building the person you will become. One day, an opportunity will come your way, just as it came from Michael Faraday. When that moment arrives, you'll be ready, not because of luck, but because of everything you've been quietly building along the way. So never believe that you need to be rich, attend a famous school, or have the perfect beginning to achieve something extraordinary. Keep learning. Keep reading. Keep asking questions. Keep turning one page after another, because you never know which page might change your life. Thank you for spending this time with me here on Storyrium. Now I'd love to hear from you. What part of Michael Faraday's journey touched you the most? Was it the hungry boy who made one loaf of bread last an entire week? The notebook that opened the door to his dream? Or the humble scientist who turned down fame and chose a simple life instead? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I always enjoy reading them. And if you enjoyed this story, there are many more incredible journeys waiting for you here on Storyrium. Until we meet again, take good care of yourself, keep your curiosity alive, and never stop learning.